This episode is going to have some spoilers in it, so if you haven't watched the film yet and don't want it spoiled, go watch the film now and come back later. Or skip this episode and I'll see you again next week. From the very beginning of the film until its final scene, there was a hidden character throughout the story. I'm talking about the lens flare coming from the sun. The lens flare was its own character in the film and only finally reveals itself on the stormy drive to Terry Redlin Art Gallery in Watertown, South Dakota near the end of the film. It wasn't an overt character in the story until that moment. For the majority of the film, the lens flare stays in the background and is like a watchful eye, like a spectator in the story, but it was always there. If you look close, you will see the flare at various parts in the film. It appears on the opening walk, the opening drive, and the backstory scene where I look over and see a rainbow. It also emerges from the trees when my mother passes. The flare even appears in the opening credits as if to say, hey, I'm part of this story too. For the most part, the flare was hiding in plain sight for the majority of the film. That all changes on the last stormy drive of the film. During that drive, I had enough of this storm that had been following me the entire trip, and out of frustration, I finally confronted. This is where the flare finally reveals itself and gives me clues as to why I went through the decade-long tribulation that I did. Now, who or what is the flare? Is it the spirit of my father, or is it the spirit of my mother? Well, the answer is no to both, because both of my parents were still alive in 2008 when we were chased out of South Dakota by that first storm. A storm that gave me an odd feeling, and I go on to describe it as almost sentient. That was when I had gotten the prophetic message of, hope you enjoyed, because this was it. This was the end of the good times. So then, who or what represents the flare? Well, there are two possible answers to this question. First, it could just be my conscience. We all have that inner voice that attempts to guide us. Now, for me, I notice that inner voice every time I'm offered dessert after a full meal. I'm sure many of you can relate to that. You'll regret it, do it. You'll regret it, do it. The other possible answer to the question is that the flare is a higher power. When the flare speaks, it uses a key identifier. I am. I am is how God identifies in biblical lore. For instance, in the Exodus story, this is how God responds to Moses while appearing in the burning bush. I am that I am. As this scripture was translated from Hebrew, the phrase can be interpreted in a few ways. It can be seen as an evasive response to the question, but it can also mean, I am always with you. Well, the flare was the beginning and the end of the film. It was always there. After this confrontation and the response, the flare seems to return from whence it came, and it seems that we are done with it for the rest of the film. Yes, it makes an appearance during the backstory scene, but that part of the film is exposition, and therefore isn't linear. But during the epilogue, the flare comes into view for what seems like the last time to take a bow for the audience at the Delicate Arch in Utah before exiting stage left. Now it seems we are done with the flare. But once again, we are not. In the final scene, as I'm walking down the road, I'm talking about how when I reach the horizon and how I will rest my spirit if I can. It is a metaphor that describes the end of my life. And as I head toward the horizon, the flare appears one last time, seeming to embrace my front and back, the past, the present, and the future, before finally claiming me at the end of the story. And that is the character that is hidden in plain sight in the film. So what do you think? Was the flare a higher power, or was it just my conscience? Or is it just a literary vehicle to help tell a story? I'll let you decide that for yourself. Thank you for watching, and thank you for the gift of your time.